Hello, my students of the U.S. history. Today we're going to be talking about imperialism, which is when one nation dominates another politically and or economically. Specifically, we're going to be discussing American imperialism. The origin of U.S. imperialist policy can be traced to a speech to Congress delivered by President James Monroe on December 2, 1823. On that day, the president stated that European powers should stay out of the economic and political affairs of the Western Hemisphere. This proclamation became known as the Monroe Doctrine. Important to note that by 1826, most Latin American countries had gained their independence, with two notable exceptions, Puerto Rico and Cuba. Spain held on desperately to these two islands. Why? Sugarcane. Any talk of independence was immediately and violently silenced. Stories were printed in the U.S. about atrocities committed by the Spanish government thanks to a concept known as yellow journalism, which basically was the OG clickbait. Headlines would run with the most outrageous, sensationalist text to sell papers. Kind of like how I'll be browsing YouTube and I click the thumbnail of a video only to find that I've been duped by some millionaire YouTuber siphoning views with his questionable tactics. The best example of yellow journalism was when the USS Maine, docked in Cuba to protect American economic interests on the island, mysteriously blew up in Havana Harbor. Newspapers immediately blamed the Spanish government without legitimate evidence to back up their claim. This pressures President McKinley to ask Congress for a declaration of war. So basically the US winds up in a war because they wanted Spain to pay a price for sinking a ship they really didn't sink. That should show you how powerful the media can be. When the Spanish-American War starts, we immediately learn three things. Number one, Theodore Roosevelt and his Rough Riders are badasses. Number two, we definitely need to figure out a better way to pay for wars. And number three, we are in bad shape when it comes to our ships getting from the Atlantic to the Pacific. The results of those three lessons are: number one, Teddy Roosevelt becomes president thanks to tales of his heroism. Number two, we pass the 16th Amendment, which allows the government to tax our personal income. And number three, we decide to finish carving out a giant canal that was started by the French through a country that doesn't belong to either of us. The outcome of this war is what is most important. The U.S. wins, the Spanish give Puerto Rico and Guam to the U.S. and offer the Philippines for purchase, which the U.S. buys. All of these territories, of course, allow for the expansion of U.S. commerce or trade and give the U.S. a new strategic advantage militarily. Of course, not everyone wanted us there. Take the Philippines, for example. Filipino revolutionary figure Emilio Aguinaldo continually pleaded with the U.S. for independence. Speaking of independence, whatever happened to Cuba after the Spanish-American War? Well, they became an independent country, so long as they allowed the U.S. to build a military base on their island. This agreement was known as the Platt Amendment. So big picture, 1898 is the year that the U.S. becomes a world power. But we're not done yet. That same year, the U.S. gains Hawaii. Which reminds me, this episode of Cornet's Class is brought to you by the Dole Fruit Company. Well, not so much the company as the dark history behind it, which I'm about to inform you of. You see, a cousin of the founder of the Dole Fruit Company, Sanford B. Dole, organized the straight-up theft of Hawaii from its rightful queen. How? Bombs made from pineapples. Not really. That would be a cool story, though. Dole worked with other planters to pressure the queen to abdicate or step down as ruler, or basically face execution in the slaughter of her supporters. She stepped down, Dole became president of Hawaii. The US president didn't like that, but Congress did, and so naturally, Hawaii became a territory of the United States. Yeah. And now we got fruit cups. The annexation of Hawaii isn't where US imperialism stops, however. The US helped suppress the Boxer Rebellion, which was a response by angry Chinese citizens to European and American influence corrupting Chinese culture. Then there was the promotion of the open door policy, which was really just an excuse to get European countries to accept US economic activity in China. And don't forget the words of Rear Admiral Alfred T. Mahan, advocating for a strong US Navy presence in the Pacific Ocean. There was also the Roosevelt Corollary, which was President Teddy Roosevelt's promise to back up the Monroe Doctrine with guns, which he did in the Dominican Republic. And although he wanted to venture away from the speak softly but carry a big stick dialogue of his predecessor, President Taft's dollar diplomacy largely backfired on the US when the people of Latin America saw corporate imperialism through the dollar signs. Oh yeah, and I almost forgot how many Americans were fans of The White Man's Burden. You know, the racist poem that suggested white people go out and Christianize, educate, and culturally correct everyone on the planet. Yeah. That's all for me. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and hopefully it jogged your memory on some of the stuff that we learned in class. Remember, you don't have to love your country for what it has done, but you should love your country for what it can become. I'll catch you guys next time.